may ask, who is next? You may ask, who will be? Who will be the secret boss of Adventure No 3? Me don't knows, and me don't cares. Me only cares about Spamton. The rest can go up in the airs.
Holy Kungadero, I did not think this was a prophecy, but here we are. Chapters 3 and 4 of Deltarune are out, and for the first time in Deltarune history, we have genuine confusion about the identity of the secret boss of one of the chapters. So, let's talk about how we got here, and some of the lenses we might examine this through on our quest to pin a name to the face, shall we? Before we get started, spoilers for Undertale in Deltarune. Don't hassle people for using text-to-speech, and be nice to your fellow theorists when you disagree in the comments. I think, in our pause between chapters 1 and 2 of Deltarune, a lot of us got really complacent about the story structure of this game, and to be clear, I don't think that's a bad thing, since writers actually get a lot of mileage from setting up our expectations like this, only to pull the rug out from under us later with some shocking new twist. In Chapter 3's case, this begins with a reward for defeating the secret boss. Normally, we either get one weapon or one piece of armor for defeating the boss. This is the first chapter to give us a way to obtain both, because this is also the first chapter to split the weapon and armor between two different characters, unless this is actually the knight? But wait, why can they talk then? I thought the characters in the game mimic their counterpart? Regardless, we can hardly call this boss fight at the end of the chapter the secret boss of this chapter, because this is literally a plot mandatory fight, and it's clearly intended to be beaten after you get the Shadow Mantle. So, that makes the person holding the Shadow Mantle the secret boss, right? They're the hidden, optional boss fight we need to get the special armor after all, so I think we can all agree on that. However, though they talk to us several times, they never offer us their name, and their appearance is rather ambiguous to say the least. So, who the heck is this? You might think we can solve this by just looking into the code to see what name the game uses for them. After all, the code of Chapter 1 referred to Jevil as the Joker, so perhaps it could give us a hint? But tragically, doing that yields no such clarity, as the game refers to them rather consistently as the Shadow Mantle enemy. Which, yeah, I'm pretty sure Toby is just messing with us at this point. Perhaps he's hoping we'll treat it like a fun puzzle to debate over until Chapter 5? So how might we go about approaching this puzzle? Some have taken to naming this creature after the song that plays when you fight them, dubbing it Eram, which is just mare backwards. And this sort of drives me nuts for a few reasons. The first being that, unlike the Joker, which is the name used not only for Jevil's music, but also his sprites, sound effects, and battle code, Eram never actually shows up anywhere in the game code proper. This is just the snazzy title of the song, as presented in the official Deltarune soundtrack, but that'd be like calling Jevil the circus. So, what's this song called in the game files? Nightmare NES.OGG. Oh, that parallels the cryptic hint Jevil gives us about a nightmare awakening in our heart, in the shadow of the knight's hand, if you pacified him at the end of Chapter 1. And it adds a bit of depth to the nightmare Toriel has if the player ever does manage to defeat the knight at the end of this chapter. Now that I think about it, it is possible this is literally the Roaring Knights board game miniature, and that it's just more able to chat with us in the board game than its more real counterpart. After all, doesn't the same sort of thing happen with the Bibliox in this very same chapter? In addition, their battle music is quite similar. The backgrounds of these fights both cycle through the same sequence of colors. They both seem to be lurking nearby, yet just out of view. They make their base in the shelter. And, though it goes unused, there are sprites for some sort of roaring fire attack that seem to be intended for the Roaring Knight. And they both seem to have some kind of shared history with Chris. Although, I'm not sure how to square that away with the theory that Des is the knight, since that would make these her antlers. Also, I thought Des was already represented in the sword board earlier, in the dungeon right before this. I'm not sure that's enough evidence to prove a shared identity, especially given the many other inconsistencies. So, while I personally prefer to call this creature Shadow Mantle when I'm being ambiguous, if I had to pick a shorter name, I suppose I could be persuaded to call it the Nightmare. But personally, I feel like this is a bit of a cop-out, since it basically assumes this is a riddle that can't be solved yet, and I'm a little worried about the potential for this to become a Chekhov's gun that never goes off if we all fixate on a supposed mysterious entity waiting in the shadows to pounce on us, especially when we already have two such shadows claiming that reverse spotlight. In fact, now that I think about it, a mysterious entity waiting in the shadows, vanishing mysteriously after we beat them. Where do we fight this boss again? The bunker? There's definitely a darker, yet darker thing going on with their text too. Apparently they can see in the dark, and their attack animations draw from both fire and cats, which would square away pretty smugly with Gaster's tendency to use 666 as his calling card. This is gonna sound unhinged to anyone who's not familiar with the whole Element 6's cat thing. Regardless, there are certainly a lot of parallels between this character and either the Knight or Gaster, but those two tend to be sinkholes for nearly every mysterious act or entity. So, maybe we should consider our other options before we offload even more lore responsibility onto their shoulders? It's tempting to try analyzing this just from their appearance, behaviors, or linguistic works, but doing that doesn't actually give us many candidates. Because unlike Gaster, Jevil, and Spamton, this Shadow Mantle enemy seems to be speaking with normal grammar, capitalization, and punctuation, so that's not much of a help. Some point to the references to having fun and the orange color scheme as possible evidence that this may be Shum. After all, it would explain why Shum thought they had the Shadow Mantle. Perhaps they did, but not the version of them they assumed. And it would explain the connection to Cheshire Cats. And listen, while I personally adore the Shum as the Shadow Mantle boss theory, even I must admit that it doesn't really hold up at all to scrutiny. Like, why would they be the boss of our living room if they're not even from our living room? Why does it have these weird, angel-like markings on its head instead of cat ears? And what motives could this thing possibly be operating under? It just doesn't add up. So, let's try a completely different approach to this puzzle. Instead of trying to squeeze our favorite characters into this Shadow Mantle-shaped mold, what if we instead just list the typical hallmarks that accompany a secret boss and see if there are any characters introduced in Chapter 3 possessing an abundance of them? Alright boys and girls, it's time for HalfBreadChaos's top 7 secret boss traits. Starting off with number 1. Secret bosses are boundary breakers. You could argue whether this is a mechanical thing or a storytelling trope, but if there's one consistent pattern that's held throughout the chapters, it's that secret bosses tend to encourage you to start the quests that eventually lead to fighting them. In Chapter 1, Jevil tells us how to get the key from Shun. In Chapter 2, Spamton tells us to look for the basement in Queen's Mansion. He also sells us the key gen we need to go down there in the first place. And even Gerson will offer a bit of guidance on our quest to find the Hammer of Justice. But you could argue the secret bosses also encourage boundary breaking in other ways. For example, Jevil's little cell seems to exist just off the side of the map, in a sort of out-of-bounds space. The hint to walk where the stars don't shine also resembles boundary breaking, as it requires us to walk through what would normally be solid walls to find hidden passages in the dark. Gerson himself does this a ton, if you watch the way he moves whenever he's in the dark. And as for Spamton, he does this by helping us complete the weird route, which breaks the boundaries of the game's story, instead of the game's rooms, as alluded to by the blue bead in the hospital, which breaks off the track when you complete the route in Chapter 2. The shadow crystals we obtain by beating the secret bosses also seem to be alluding to this desire to alter the story path that should normally be set in stone, as using it in the light world seems to be giving us glimpses into how the weird route will alter our relationships. When we use the shadow crystal on Noelle in Chapter 4, it says, "You thought you saw Noelle close against you," whispered, describing a situation which only seems to occur if you're on the weird route. Using it on Susie says, "You thought you saw Susie glaring at you coldly," which hasn't happened yet, but is likely how she will react if we continue down this dark and depraved path we've started on. And as for Chris seeing through their hand, I do imagine Chris is beginning to feel like we're erasing them as our will slowly overtakes their own, forcing them to hurt or even kill their childhood friends, one after another. But what's really wild is using the shadow crystals in the church dark world. If you use the shadow crystal while standing near any of the prophecies, it says, for some strange reason, no matter how you look, the prophecy's text does not warp in the crystal's lens. And if you use it specifically in the final room, with a part of the prophecy Susie, Ralsei, and Gerson are so desperately trying to erase, it adds, you shook the crystal. However, nothing changed. Implying that this is, ultimately, the goal of the secret bosses, being empowered to find their freedom by altering their destiny. Which brings me to trait number 2. Secret bosses have a theme of freedom. They're not the only ones who mention it, of course. Birdley uses the word in Chapter 2 for example, when you rescue him from Queen. But this word is used rarely enough that it can still be a helpful dog whistle for a character who might be a secret boss, and thus could be worth further scrutiny, especially because secret bosses tend to use the word quite often, compared to other characters. In Chapter 1, Jevil uses the words free, or freedom, over half a dozen times, starting with his claim that the kings locked everyone away, leaving Jevil as the only free one. He continues that he feels lonely in his little freedom, and frames the choice to play a game with him as us setting ourselves free. He uses the word again when we find the key, saying that a marvelous fun is about to break free. And finally, once the fight begins, one of the lines of flavor text reads, "The air crackles with freedom." In Chapter 2, when Spamton is explaining why he became a big shot, he states that he was never in it for the money. He was only ever in it for the freedom to make his own deals and call his own shots. As Spamton knew, he describes the power he feels as freedom before panicking about not having enough to reach heaven. In the weird route, he wonders if Chris and Noelle froze Birdley in an effort to drink up that sweet, sweet freedom sauce. And, of course, as you might expect, he also has the same flavor text as Jevil when you find him in his Neo form. If you spare him by breaking the strings, he wonders if you're trying to gift him his freedom. And, though it doesn't work quite as intended, he does wonder if, by defeating him, we might be getting strong enough to eventually break our own strings. So, using this word in reference to defying our fate and choosing our own path seems to be pretty consistent with Spamton, ironic as that sounds. And finally, we get to Gerson in Chapter 4. Gerson turns out to be a bit of an oddball when it comes to secret boss behaviors, since, unlike Jevil and Spamton, he's not an object that was given life by imagination alone, but also an actual person who was once a Lightner, and whose essence is now tethered to the hammer his son keeps in the church. And while he doesn't use the word freedom as directly or as often as Jevil and Spamton, he does repeatedly encourage Susie to hold the white pen of hope that she might write her own destiny. And what's that I see in the flavor text for his fight? The air crackles green with freedom. Very interesting, especially given that Spamton's strings are green, as is the boundary box around our soul during the bullet-dodging segments of the fight. And yet, despite being roughly on the same page with Jevil and Spamton in regards to freedom and fate, he never uses the shadow crystal. This might explain why he doesn't vanish the moment you win the fight. But I'd argue there's another quality most of the secret bosses share that Gerson lacks, and that trait is number 3 on our list. Secret bosses are lonely. They tend to be represented by forgotten, neglected objects in the light world. Their boss fights usually take place in far-off, isolated areas of the map. If you talk to the king about Jevil in Chapter 4, he says, "A shame he had to be tricked away by his closest companion, the magician, Shun, whose smile has gone empty since that day." It's unclear how much the element of betrayal from one's own friends is a component, but at the very least, there's a definite theme of social isolation present here. And while Jevil makes it really easy for us by literally saying, "So lonely, lonely, I be," Spamton's situation needs to be pieced together somewhat more indirectly. When you defeat Spamton Neo, the Addisons gather in the trash zone to reflect on their memories with Spamton, where they confess to feeling jealous of him and starting to abandon him. A sentiment Spamton himself calls back to several times, especially in the weird route where he references calling his friends over and over, screaming into the receiver until his voice ran out, and realizing he's all alone. He also speaks of muttering the names of his lost friends while lying all alone at the bottom of a dumpster. So it's pretty safe to say that by the time we get to him in Chapter 2, he's feeling pretty lonely and abandoned. So, at the risk of indulging in the special pleading fallacy, I'm going to highlight this quirk of Gerson as a potential exception which proves the rule in cases not accepted situation. Partially because both of our other secret bosses so clearly exhibit this feature, and partially because Gerson's ability to connect easily with others is a major theme that's referenced over and over and which seems to be a major component of why he never expressed an interest in the shadow crystal. In life, he was surrounded by adoring fans. In death, he's still deeply loved and missed by all who knew him. His son visits his grave to this day and recites his work in his sermons, so you could never call Gerson forgotten or abandoned. And even in the dark world, he ends up making fast friends with Susie. And he's even able to recruit enemies to his study, a trait that would normally be unique to the player and which takes Ralsei completely by surprise. So, given all of this, I'd argue that, at the very least, secret bosses heavily explore the themes of loneliness and lost connection. And that the Shadow Crystal seems to be an artifact that's particularly tempting or alluring to secret bosses who are growing increasingly desperate for a connection they've lost. Perhaps this is what the book in the Chapter 4 egg room is referring to when it reads, "And so wept the fallen star, making rivers with its tears. Then, slowly, from the bitter water, something grew. It looked like glass." Perhaps shadow crystals are not just found by secret bosses, but in some way, shaped by them. We know Spamton was a big shot and Jevil the court jester, both of which would technically be stars before they lost their jobs and thus became fallen stars. So, perhaps the shadow crystals were formed from the tears they wept in their loneliness. I'm kind of terrified to ask what this has to do with the knight's weapon, which acts like glass when struck. And the fact that Asgore apparently has some kind of broken shard of black glass in the light world. But what I'm really curious about is this conch shell in Chapter 3. The description says that it's surrounded by washed up glass and that not a person seemed to want it, which seems to parallel the shadow crystals. But then, if you choose to listen to it, it reads that you could hear the sound of the ocean, and that this is a pity, because it was just repeating all it knew. This recurring ocean sounds theme is going to drive me nuts before this game finishes, I swear. Wait, what were we talking about? Common secret boss traits? Right, so, trait number 4. The prize was the friends we made along the way. This obviously won't directly reveal who the Shadow Mantle is, but I do think this is important to keep in mind, so let's go over the obvious outlier here, Jevil. When you defeat Jevil through violence, Jevil says, "Take me and do your strongest," and then he transforms into the Devil's Knife. But if you win through pacifism, Jevil says he's going to sleep for 100 years, and concludes his speech by saying, "Take this and do your strongest." This seems to imply that he literally cut off his tail and handed it to you. And I do think this is what Toby originally intended when he wrote this cutscene. But, and I know this is normally heresy to say about an author, but hear me out. I think Toby may have changed his mind. When he introduced the concept of recruiting enemies in Chapter 2, it appears he was originally intending to make Jevil a recruit for players who defeated him through violence, but not for players who beat him via mercy. However, given that there was a 3-year pause between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, I suspect that, sometime during development or play testing, he realized that if he implemented this plan as initially intended, it would have made all the players who beat Jevil through mercy absolutely furious to learn they had completely ruined their chances of recruiting their favorite Chaos Clown by trying to show him kindness. So, I believe this may be a case of early installment weirdness, in which Toby decided to quietly drop the secret bosses from the list of recruits, and instead just check if either of the items for beating them are equipped. In Jevil's case, having either the tail or the scythe equipped will trigger unique dialogue with Task Manager, in which she acts as though she can hear someone saying, "Chaos, chaos!" And then this happens again in Chapter 3, in the boss fight with Tenna. As if you're wearing the tail, you'll find the option to bet is altered as long as you have Jevil's tail equipped. Selecting it will trigger this laughing sound effect. So, I mean, if it talks like Jevil and laughs like Jevil, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is probably Jevil. The fact that secret bosses are literally the item you get for winning becomes more obvious with Spamton, because in Chapter 3, there's a room where he literally transforms back and forth between item and Spamton, regardless of which item you acquired. Although, it seems like these items might be able to die, as in the weird route. This doesn't happen. So, either Spamton is literally frozen as a puppet scarf here, or he just really does not want to reveal his continued existence to Chris for fear that we might try to finish what we started. Finally, we come to Gerson, who seems to be haunting the Hammer of Justice like a ghost, likely because he's a dead Lightner whose dust has been sprinkled on it. Although it's hard to confirm precisely how this works with certainty, due to the fact that we're unable to double-check the office after sealing all the dark fountains, and thus cannot check if Susie took the hammer afterwards or not. So, why am I bringing this up at all? Well, it's because of trait number 5. Secret bosses do not appear as denizens of Castletown after their fountains are sealed. This is actually one of the most useful pieces of evidence we have for narrowing this down because we actually have quite a few examples of recruits that never show up in the recruit menu and yet who, nonetheless, join Castletown once the chapter ends. This includes the Sweet Cap'n Cakes, Newbert, the legendary hacker, all of the characters in Chapter 1, Mike and all his attendants. Yet, as of Chapter 4, my dreams of having a tea party with Jevil and Spamton remain unfulfilled. The implication here seems to be that, because the secret bosses are our equipment, they're too busy being in our inventory. Or, they're waiting in this area here by the cliffside, in item form, if we defeated them in a previous save file, but never got the item. This means that, theoretically, whenever we're in doubt about the secret bosses of a particular chapter, we can narrow down the list of suspects by checking who's showed up in that chapter's dark world, ranking them by prominence, and crossing off anyone who appears in Castletown later. Handy. Also building off the idea that secret bosses are their items, the sixth trait secret bosses seem to have in common is a sense of deep absence or loss when they leave their world. For Jevil, this comes in the form of his little cell literally vanishing from this room and the music slowing down to a mournful crawl. For Spamton, there's the unsettling way he transfers himself from his shop into your disc. The dramatic death scene when you defeat Spamton Neo in battle, regardless of method. And, of course, the pile of Addisons that show up in the junkyard. For Gerson, it's a little bit stranger. But the game does build a subtle sense of dread by reminding us in little ways that he's not going to be around once we seal the dark fountain, and then by making him vanish the moment we try to return to him in the second sanctuary. I think it's pretty obvious from the way Susie and Rolsey speak of him that they both genuinely believe he's gone for good before that big reveal near the end. And, just like Jevil and Spamton, his study has a definite air of melancholy about it, both from the slowed down music and the way the characters talk in his absence. With Gerson, this stuff seems pretty obvious. Like, of course such a popular author is going to be missed when he vanishes. But with Spamton and Jevil, this feeling of loss is actually acting in deep contrast to the themes of abandonment they set up earlier. So, this actually creates another possible opportunity for us to spot our missing secret boss. As, in theory, all we need to do is look for a lonely NPC in Chapter 3 whose absence has a tangible, depressing impact on the world. And if all that fails, there is, I'd argue, one more massive trait shared by all the secret bosses that might serve as a clue to the identity of this one. Namely, secret bosses create a treasure chest for their prize if you don't have enough room in your inventory when you defeat them. So, now that we have our list, let's apply it to the candidates. First, we'll grab all the NPCs from Chapter 3 with unique designs, cross off all the recruits, and rank them according to prominence. Let's see who tops the list. We can cross off Serious Trashy right off the bat since Lee straight up refuses to join our Castletown and thus has an alibi for not being here. The Couch and Crowd both go to the bottom of the list for having no dialogue. Also this, vending machine? I can't tell if it counts as a character or not, but the wiki lists it, and it does smile when you pay it $1 dark dollar. So, it might be sentient. The Bibliox and Flying Aces are all related to the Egg Quest, so let's go ahead and assume they're currently in Nowhere. That leaves us with the Cactus, the unknown curtain NPC with a crush on the water cooler, who might actually just be the Cactus again, Sulliver Sam, and both the Gold Sons. All of these NPCs have dialogue, but only 1 or 2 lines. And, you know, there is one character with quite a bit of dialogue, one who's foreshadowed in the Spamton sweepstakes, who greets us in the opening lineup right between Olnina and Tenna himself. And that NPC is Ram. Shocking, I know. But if I'm going to be spending the rest of my Deltarune-dependent career confidently calling Ram the secret boss of Chapter 3, I want to be able to prove it as definitively as possible. So, let's go ahead and run him through the checklist real quick. Let's see. Tendency to boundary break. Oh, this one's actually really easy to miss. Did you know you can actually get behind his little stand in the green room? Turns out there's a secret passageway through this wall. But it's crazy hard to notice this on your own because he keeps the passageway closed while he's standing guard here. But once he moves backstage after Tenna finishes the final board, this passageway opens up and you can walk straight through the wall back here to get behind the stand where you can spy on Susie and Rolse as they play video games without you. Ah, how wholesome. The passageway stays open even after you scoot him aside. And if you die during the game and step back toward the lobby, you may notice that Ram seems to disappear, which likely rules out any foul play from Susie. And yet, the passage remains open right up until you defeat the Shadow Mantle. But hey, maybe this is just an elaborate coincidence. Like Jevil and Spamton before him, Ram is also the one who starts you on the quest to find the Shadow Mantle by inviting you to check out this area that's supposed to be off limits per Tenna's orders. If you didn't get an S rank at all, he'll actually encourage you toward it, offering you progressively better prizes for getting higher ranks in Tenna's games. But what really catches my eye is this line here: if you express boredom with Tenna's games, in which he says,
"See? I knew you wouldn't like it. Something's missing, right? Some action? Some mystery? Maybe some more freedom? Just between you and me. If you can get in the S rankers room."
Wait, did he say that or think that? Parentheses usually mean the character is thinking something to themselves, or at least that's what Noel indirectly tells us, but just between you and me seems to imply the opposite. His mouth is completely closed too, but I didn't even notice any of that at first because I was too distracted by the sound that just played. Creepy jingle. This plays one other time in the entire game and you'll never guess where. Find the key and I'll let you be free. The key is hidden from the eyes. The old shopkeeper knows a secret. So Ram and Jevil both use creepy jingle to nudge us toward this forbidden path. And notice the way Ram used the word freedom? That's not the only time. Look at how he tries to pitch this area to Chris once we do head into the S rank room.
If I know Chris, and boy do I know Chris, that's not what you want, innit? Freedom. That's what you want, chum. Freedom. Well, if I can go hush-hush for a minute here. Chris, love. That's what we got backstage. The original game, where you decide what to do. Alright, enough explaining. More gaming. I'll keep an eye out for Tenna. You go have some real fun, alright, love?
The emphasis on ensuring Chris has fun definitely seems in line with the Shadow Mantle enemy's little spiel later.
Chris. Oh, Chris. Is it fun, Chris? Playing around like this? That's why you're searching for them, aren't you? The shadow crystals. And the Shadow Mantle that I'm holding. Do you honestly think it'll get you what you want? No, part of you is just enjoying this, isn't it?
There's also an Easter egg on the first sword board where the Shadow Mantle creature appears and the text reads,
Having fun?
And finally, the line about how freedom is just a thing for big shots. So, at this point, I think we can definitively say that Ram uses the word freedom more than any other character in Chapter 3. But where's the tragic backstory? The fall from grace? The social isolation? Well, if you don't do the quest to find the Shadow Mantle, then Ram will actually turn to stone early while he's still in the green room. And if you interact with him, a Pippin will pop up to give you his backstory.
He was a plug, but because you played with him like any other toy, it made him feel special. Might have given him a bit of an ego, in fact. Always condescending to any plant, saying what's best for Chris. Couldn't get rid of him, so Tenna made him walk the stand. Us from Cardcastle fed him fine. He never really belonged. His first day at the stand, he joked how about the usual. No one laughed. Mixing drinks alone for himself, he wasn't allowed to handle the points. No one will shed a tear for him. Inside, he was probably stone already.
Seems we're building a bit of a theme here of these secret bosses getting some of their power from the meaning Lightners imbue them with. Jevil can do anything because we, the Lightners, have decided that the Joker can act like any card you wish whenever you play a game with him.
I can do anything.
Regarding Spamton, we know from Swatch that the old machine in the basement was some Leitner's passion project turned guilty pleasure, and eventually left to rot. It had a lot of meaning to them. When Spamton took it as his body, he gained all that power for himself. So, if Ram were the secret boss, the power came not from the Shadow Mantle, but from the way Chris perceived them as being, just like any other toy, and played with them as a child. But if Ram is an electrical plug, why does the Shadow Mantle enemy use fire attacks instead of like little bolts of electricity? They mention fire in their speech at the end too, when they say that Chris's eyes are
flickering red like pretty little flames. Your eyes can't hide it, Chris. Without play, the knife grows dull.
Wait, we have a young child who's constantly getting into trouble, breaking into the oven, stealing things, carrying around a knife, who also plays with an electrical outlet? Chris, please tell me you didn't stick a knife in an electrical outlet as a child. That seems kind of... well, I guess I can't call it more extreme than ripping your soul out of your chest, or slashing Toriel's tires, or any of the other acts of dangerous mischief they get up to. And if a plug catches fire, I suppose one of the go-to solutions is to throw a fire blanket on it to smother the flames, so maybe that's why this boss is wearing the Shadow Mantle. The other ways an electrical outlet catches fire aren't much better. Exposure to water is a classic one, but there's another explanation that actually lines up pretty well with the surrounding context of this scene, so if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to propose a quick theory. A big theme of this little game is the concept of immersion. The further we go into the quest, the more the line between players and characters starts to blur. We see examples of this when we spy on Tenna, when Chris expresses discomfort about hurting their friends, when they try to resist going to the bunker, and most fascinatingly, when our control is temporarily shifted from Chris to the semi-invisible enemy that might be meant to represent Des due to the black deer sprite assigned to this object deep within the game code. And this culminates in doing actual physical damage to Chris whenever they get hit by the Shadow Mantle boss fight. Like, this game does have a game over screen and a way to let you try a segment again after you lose, but this is the one case where that doesn't happen. So, I do think the fact this can literally kill you is meant to be the logical extreme of this narrative immersion. When you die in the game, you die for real. So, what if that's happening to Ram too? What if the reason they turn to stone early when we ignore them is because we robbed them of their purpose? An electrical plug's job is to power the game. And as a plug Chris used to play make-believe with, Ram's job, in a sentimental sense, is to give the game meaning, to become a part of the story. So Ram adds some action, some mystery. They whisper, "Well done, you found my secret hiding place." And Chris isn't sure if the voice is coming from inside the game, or if it's in the room with him. They ask Ram about it later, but Ram insists that no one was backstage with us because they were watching the door. The mystery grows deeper. I'm not really sure why Ram isn't at the door here after you start playing the final game. Maybe they crawled behind the curtain here and plugged the console into their face? Or maybe they literally crawled inside the game the same way we ourselves step into the screen at the end? Whatever the case, the dialogue with the Dust Bunny isn't updated until you defeat the Shadow Mantle boss, even though Ram moves before that. So either this is a very confusing coding oversight, or part of the narrative. Either way, thinking back to how horrifying it was at the end of the Spamton fight, in either of the two routes, I imagine what happened next is, the Dust Bunny started wondering where everyone went, came over to investigate, saw Ram do whatever it is Ram did when they were defeated and became one with the Shadow Mantle. And then got the biggest jump scare of their life when a tiny pixelated version of Chris showed up. This would explain why the path to get behind Ram's stand vanishes the moment you beat this boss. It would explain why all the game consoles stop working from this point on. It's not just that one of the characters escaped, they literally lost electricity without a power strip to plug into. And it would line up with the tendency for the other secret bosses to have a sort of dramatic, yet ambiguous death scene that leaves everyone around them in shock. And I can't think of another character like this, who's featured so very prominently, not just in the game itself, but in the lead up to the game, via the Spamton sweepstakes, and yet who never appears in Castletown, no matter what we do in the chapter beforehand. But you want to know what really sold me on Ram being the secret boss of Chapter 3? If you don't have enough room in your armor to get the Shadow Mantle, the treasure chest appears elsewhere, just like the prize for beating the boss in any of the other chapters. But it doesn't appear in this room, nor the console room, nor the S-rank changing room, even though these are all perfectly viable candidates. Oh no. You know where Toby put the shadow mantle when this happens? Right on the counter of Ramb's stand. Why would Toby put it here, of all places? It's not like the other chests are in particularly convenient areas, and it wouldn't have been difficult at all for him to make this ambiguous. So, at this point, I'm as confident as I can be that Ram is the secret boss of Chapter 3, and I can't imagine many ways for Toby to make this more obvious, short of literally making some kind of public statement or like sneaking a fun Ram Easter egg into one of the later chapters the same way he did Spamton and Jevel. Breaking news, I'm from the future, and you'll never guess what Toby just put in his Black Friday sales ad.
3 classic heroes! Sword, scarf, and... Hey, wait a minute, Ram! I thought I told you to change the...
What do you think? Is he tipping his hand hard enough yet? But I do think there's a certain kind of poetry in Ram being the overlooked object in the bunch. After all, we've surely all felt the annoyance of having to shuffle the Joker out of a deck of cards or filter the spam from our emails, but how often do you think about the power strip you plug your game consoles into? Probably never, right? Unless it catches fire. Wait.
Many months later.
Sorry, seems I froze up for a bit there. What do you think? Is the secret boss of Chapter 3 actually Ram? Could this have been the event that traumatized the holidays and ultimately led to Asgore getting kicked off the Force, as alluded to by this foreshadowing puzzle of foreshadows? Or is this just the night playing video games in the back room, like some kind of silly goose? Let me know down in the comments. Special thanks to Sergio for the cool sprite work of Baby Chris, Lilypad for voicing Ram and Pippins, Molly Star for TTS audio editing, and of course, all of you for your continued patience and support. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. To celebrate the 100,000 subscriber milestone, we're introducing fan art in the credits. That's right, there are so many of you now, I can no longer handle the sheer quantity of awesome things you all create, which is the best problem I've ever heard of, and not one I ever even imagined in my wildest dreams. So, special thanks to Yana for helping with fan art management. If you want your fan art in the credits, go ahead and post it to the HalfBreadChaos Reddit, with a flair feature presentation, because, we couldn't think of a better flair name. Though if you have suggestions, feel free to leave those in the comments too, or get a discussion thread going because, if there's one thing I've learned as a YouTuber, it's that crowdsourced names are always better than anything I can come up with. Just be warned, if you post your fan art in the Reddit with this flair, or whatever we end up renaming this flair to, then it, and your chosen name, will be in the credits of a video forever, and I won't be able to pay you for it, or take it down, no matter how much you really want me to. Even if you realize you made some kind of critical mistake, want to update it, or decide to change your name. Such is the nature of YouTube. Being a big shot is really scary and full of strings, but your patience and support makes it all worth it. So, let's see if we can drown out the scary times with a little bit of fun. And until next time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Hyperlink blocked.